Inside San Quentin's transformation, from death row to rehabilitation center. On the northern shore of San Francisco Bay sits a prison that has spent more than a century building one of the most feared reputations in America. From a distance, San Quentin doesn't look very different from many other prisons. There are fences, guard towers, concrete buildings, and layers of security. Cars pass by on nearby roads. Boats move across the water. Life continues as normal just outside its walls. But for generations, the name San Quentin carried a weight that few prisons could match. This was California's oldest prison. More importantly, it was the home of the state's death row. For decades, men sentenced to death lived here, often spending years or even decades waiting as appeals slowly worked their way through the courts. To many Americans, San Quentin became more than a prison. It became a symbol of punishment, a symbol of justice, and for some, a symbol of fear. Today, however, something extraordinary is happening behind those same walls. The prison once known for death row is being transformed into a rehabilitation center. Classrooms are replacing empty spaces. Educational programs are expanding. Officials are investing in job training, personal development, and re-entry preparation. The transformation has sparked a national debate. Can a prison famous for punishment become a place focused on rehabilitation? Can people who have committed serious crimes truly change? And perhaps most importantly, does helping inmates rebuild their lives make society safer? Or does it come at the expense of justice? To understand why this transformation matters, we first need to understand what San Quentin represented for most of its history. San Quentin opened in 1852, only 2 years after California became a state. At the time, California was growing rapidly. New towns were appearing, populations were expanding, and state leaders needed a place to house people convicted of crimes. Few could have imagined that the prison would still be operating more than 170 years later. Over the decades, San Quentin became one of the most recognized correctional facilities in America. Thousands of inmates passed through its gates. Some served short sentences and eventually returned to society. Others spent the rest of their lives inside. But what truly separated San Quentin from many other prisons was its connection to California's death penalty system. For years, inmates sentenced to death were housed there. Some became nationally known figures. Others faded into obscurity. Yet they all lived under the same reality. Every morning they woke up inside a prison built around uncertainty. Many inmates arrived expecting their cases to move quickly. Instead, years turned into decades. Court hearings were delayed. Appeals continued. Legal challenges stretched on. Outside the prison, technology changed, governments changed, and entire generations grew up. Inside San Quentin, some prisoners remained in the same place. Imagine entering a prison in your 20s and still being there in your 50s. That reality became surprisingly common. By the 2000s, California's death row population had become one of the largest in the United States. Hundreds of inmates lived there, many waiting longer than anyone expected. The prison's reputation grew darker as the years passed. News reports focused on notorious criminals. Television documentaries highlighted life behind bars. Hollywood movies referenced the prison's history. For most Americans, San Quentin became a place associated with final consequences. Yet, while the public often focused on death row, another conversation was quietly taking place across the country. Researchers, correctional officials, and criminal justice experts were asking a difficult question. What is prison actually supposed to accomplish? The traditional answer seemed obvious. Someone commits a crime. They go to prison. They are punished. Justice is served. But reality turned out to be more complicated. Most inmates do not spend their entire lives behind bars. Eventually, many are released. When that happens, they return to neighborhoods, workplaces, schools, and families. The question became simple. What happens next? Studies consistently showed that many former inmates struggled after release. Some had limited education. Others had no job experience. Many faced challenges finding housing or employment. As a result, some returned to criminal activity and eventually found themselves back in prison. This cycle frustrated policymakers. Taxpayers spent billions operating prisons. Communities wanted safer streets. Victims wanted justice. Yet many people continued moving through the same cycle again and again. For some experts, the solution was not simply longer sentences. It was rehabilitation. The idea was straightforward. If prison gives people education, job training, counseling, and opportunities for growth, perhaps more inmates can successfully rebuild their lives after release. Perhaps fewer people return to crime, and perhaps communities become safer. Not everyone agreed. Critics argued that prison should focus primarily on punishment and accountability. They worried that rehabilitation programs could make people forget the seriousness of criminal behavior. Supporters countered that rehabilitation was not about excusing crime. It was about preventing future crime. The debate continued for years. Then California made a decision that would dramatically change San Quentin's future. In 2019, Governor Gavin Newsom announced a moratorium on executions. Executions were effectively halted throughout California. The decision represented a major shift in the state's approach to criminal justice. Soon after, officials began discussing an even larger transformation. Instead of being known primarily as the home of death row, San Quentin would become the center of a new rehabilitation-focused model. The idea drew inspiration from correctional systems in countries such as Norway, where prison officials placed significant emphasis on rehabilitation and reducing repeat offenses. California leaders studied these systems carefully. They visited facilities, they examined research, and they asked a question that would have sounded impossible only a few years earlier. What if San Quentin became a symbol of rehabilitation instead of punishment? The answer eventually led to one of the most ambitious prison reform projects in modern American history. Officials announced plans to transform the prison and officially rename it the San Quentin Rehabilitation Center. The new name was not just a marketing decision. It represented a completely different philosophy. For generations, the prison's identity had been built around confinement. Now officials wanted it to focus on preparation. Preparation for employment. Preparation for responsibility. Preparation for life after prison. The changes were substantial. Educational opportunities expanded. Vocational training programs grew. New learning spaces were developed. Programs focused on communication skills, personal accountability, leadership development, and career readiness. The goal was not to pretend crimes never happened. The goal was to use time in prison more effectively. Supporters argued that every inmate who successfully reintegrates into society represents a potential crime that never occurs. A future victim who never becomes a victim. A family that stays together. A community that becomes safer. Yet the transformation also sparked intense criticism. For many victims' families, discussions about rehabilitation can be painful. Their loved ones are gone. Their losses cannot be reversed. No classroom, training program, or counseling session can change that reality. Some families worry that prison reform discussions sometimes focus too much on offenders and not enough on victims. Others question whether taxpayer money should be spent expanding opportunities inside prisons. These concerns remain a major part of the debate, and they highlight why San Quentin's transformation has become such a controversial story. Because this debate is not really about buildings. It is not about prison names, and it is not even about San Quentin alone. It is about how society views justice. On one side are people who believe rehabilitation is one of the strongest tools available for reducing future crime. On the other side are people who believe punishment must remain the central purpose of prison. Both sides often want the same outcome: safer communities, fewer victims, less crime, but they disagree on how to get there. Meanwhile, inside San Quentin, change continues. The prison that once represented death row is gradually developing a different identity. Students attend classes. Inmates participate in training programs. Staff members work within a system that is attempting to balance security with rehabilitation. The process is far from complete. Challenges remain. Violence still exists within prisons. Security concerns remain important. Not every inmate will change. Not every program will succeed. Even supporters acknowledge that rehabilitation is not a guarantee. but they argue that the goal is improvement, not perfection. The true test of San Quentin's transformation may take years to measure. Will more former inmates successfully rebuild their lives? Will fewer people return to prison? Will communities become safer? Those answers are still unfolding. Yet regardless of what happens next, one fact is impossible to ignore. San Quentin is no longer simply the prison it once was. For more than a century, it stood as one of America's most powerful symbols of punishment. Today, it stands at the center of a completely different conversation. A conversation about redemption, responsibility, change, and the future of criminal justice itself. Because at the heart of San Quentin's transformation lies a question that society has struggled with for generations. Can a person who has done terrible things truly become someone different? And if the answer is yes, what should a prison do about it? For decades, San Quentin was known for housing people at the end of their journey. Now, whether people agree with it or not, California is trying to make it a place where a different journey begins. And that may become the most important chapter in the prison's long and complicated history.